Hello, I'm Rabbi Mark Gelman.
Now I'm Father Tom Hartman. We're the God Squad.
We still are. You know, Tommy, when my grandpa and grandma and grandpa and grandma came to this country through Ellis Island, they had nothing. They had nothing, and they were exploited by the garment district owners, shop owners. There was no protection. There was prejudice. And, you know, people forget that immigrant communities, when they come to this country, have enormous problems integrating. And as men of faith, we need to open our hearts to the struggles of people to become American and to integrate into our culture.
The scripture, the spiritual message over and over again is that we're all made in the image of God. And each person is afforded a dignity by God that we as human beings try to imitate.
Absolutely. And this program, we're going to talk about some of the prejudices and difficulties that Muslim Americans and Muslims who are not yet American legally, but who want to be and who want to integrate into this culture, some of the problems that they face. And we're very delighted to have joining us on the show two wonderful guests.
They are Reverend Mark J. Lukens, president of the Interfaith Alliance of Long Island.
And also Naeem Mohaiemen of the Disappeared in America Project. First of all, welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. First, just personally, tell us about this extraordinary multimedia project that you have that is in the Queens Museum in
Flushing, Queens.
In Flushing, Queens.
It's actually a group of us, a collective of 15 people. Mm-hmm. We call ourselves the Visible Collective, so it's the opposite of invisible. And as a group of 15 people who are filmmakers, activists, lawyers, and artists, we put together a museum installation which uses a trilogy of short films, audio soundscapes, installation objects, and photographs to kind of bring attention to the situation of Muslims post 9/11.
And how do you do that? Tell us about the exhibit.
Well, there are three films. There are interviews of various people. One is an interview of a person who's in detention for 9 months. Another is an interview of a Muslim man who's on the no-fly list and now can't get off. And another one is a fictional recreation of detention of two men in New York City. The installation objects look at laws that have been used to detain people and look at a list of names of people who were detained, and we put them in the installation project where people look at it. Mm-hmm. And they have to interact with the pieces because it's a museum piece. And then also we have 6 photographs which are across the windows, which are of 6 family members of 6 detained people. Because we just wanted people to kind of come face to face with these are the faces of the people who are directly affected.
Mark, the Interfaith Alliance, what does it purport to do?
Well, the Interfaith Alliance represents about 70 religious faiths and communities. It's a national organization. We were formed in the mid-1990s to protect the prophetic voice of religion in the public square, to promote religious liberty, and to advocate for those laws and principles in our pluralistic democracy that safeguard those religious liberties.
What have you done for Muslim civil rights? How has the organization participated in that struggle?
Well, our organization has been involved in advocacy work, in things like petition drives, letter writing campaigns. We've issued public statements. I believe we're issuing amicus briefs and some cases involving Muslims who we believe have been civil rights have been abrogated under the system. We also, our primary role, though, is to continue to bring all these religious groups together. We advocate for the rights, civil rights of Muslim Americans for the same reason that we would advocate for the rights of Christian Americans or Jewish Americans or any Americans, because we believe...
So any person who is in some way taken advantage of is in your view?
Yes, because our primary concern is that we believe that the United States is the most vitally religious nation in the Western world. And we believe that the pluralistic nature of our country, the separation of church and state, promote that vitality. And so that is our mission, to safeguard those things.
Now, our country, of course, is at war and during situations of war, certain extraordinary things usually go into effect. What is the reaction of the Muslim community to the Patriot Act?
Well, everyone understands that after something as terrible as the 9/11 attacks, that people need to feel safe. They need to feel that the government is looking out for them. We believe, however, and our Muslim members believe that that there are problems, serious problems with the Patriot Act in terms of some of its provisions being ill-defined, too widespread, and those have resulted in abuses. And some of the things that Naeem is highlighting in his presentation are precisely those kinds of abuses.
Naeem, let's talk about that. What is your sense, first of all, of the big picture in the weighing of two primary ethical goods, the good of protecting America from attack and the good of protecting the rights of people in America, both citizens and those who visit here? How do you think this balance presently is set?
Well, I definitely think it's too much on the side of violating civil rights. It's, of course, a very tricky thing because, of course, you have to protect the borders and protect the country. And, I wish that there was more protection before 9/11 so that would prevent that from happening. So we totally support steps being taken. And we understand that part of that is, looking at, who is more likely to commit acts, etc. But what's happening is that in that effort, all checks and balances have been removed. So one of our objections to what's going on right now is, okay, let's say you detain somebody because you suspect them of having done something. They should have their rights. They should be able
habeas
to
corpus.
Habeas corpus. And what's happening a lot under current environment is that a lot of those rights are being taken away.
Are they being taken away from American citizens or who are Muslim, or are they being taken away from people who are actually here illegally and therefore their rights, their claim to rights, is somewhat more ambiguous?
I think it's being taken away from all of them. U.S. citizens,
equally?
Well, U.S. citizens less so, but still are being taken away from U.S. citizens who are Muslim, from permanent residents, i.e. green cards, who are Muslim, because they're more vulnerable. There are actually laws being passed that allows green cards to be stripped. And there are also laws being talked about where citizenship can be stripped, as happened, for example, with Yasser Hamdi, where his citizenship was taken away. So it's definitely happening for all of those people. I mean, illegal immigrants were always vulnerable, but it's actually now happening to legal people who are green card holders and legal people who are U.S. citizens who happen to be Muslim. And it's certainly affecting them much more than it's affecting immigrants from other communities.
We will continue this discussion when we return on our Muslim neighbors.
Welcome back.
And we talked earlier about the idea that the United States adopted certain acts, such as the Patriot Act. What happened in Europe? Well, we were...
Right. Actually, that's a very good point. I've done a lot of traveling in Europe for my work. In Europe, the reaction has been much stronger.
Better or worse?
Much worse.
Worse?
Much worse. In England now, there's legislation that's been passed that actually allows a British citizen to have their citizenship taken away completely. Just like that. And so the due process there is much less, and also society is much more Islamophobic in Europe. And I think in general, European society is much more ambivalent with religion, period. And you have the situation with the French ban on the burqa. Now, me personally, I actually don't support the burqa, personally as a Muslim, but I also think that it's dangerous when laws are passed to take that away, because what it results is that the Muslim community feels further distanced from mainstream society. And if you compare Muslims in Europe versus Muslims in America are still much more integrated than Muslims in Europe.
Mark, what would you say to somebody who came up to you and said, I know there's injustice, but this isn't the realm of religion. this is the realm of government. This is a political issue. If it weren't for protection and safety, we wouldn't really have the government looking into it. But it certainly isn't the role for
Well,
pastors.
I would say that if the role of religion and religious people is not to speak out on moral issues and issues that relate directly to the teachings of our faith, then who would be the moral voice, the moral conscience of our nation? I think we run into a danger, and we're seeing the manifestation of that to a degree in the United States, and it is something that we have to be vigilant about. When we have been subjected to the kind of heinous acts that we have been subjected to, that opens the door for all kinds of responses and reactions, some of which are understandable, but not necessarily moral. The United States of America is a country whose strength has been based on its aspirations to high moral principles. We're the good guys.
Right. And if we leave aside the legal question of how you find terrorists, because in my experience and talking to law enforcement people I know, terrorists don't generally wear a big red T on their sweatshirt that enables the police to just go and put them in a car and take them away.
And Mark, that's really, you're touching I think you're hitting the nail on the head, so to speak, because that is where the abuses and potential abuses come from. Because when we recognize an enemy as being of a faith that is different than the majority of our people, and they don't wear a scarlet letter or something to tell us, then it is easy to fall into the idea that all Muslims are the enemy. And that is something that I think we have to be hyper vigilant against. You know, in the Second World War, we fought the most heinous, evil regime in the history of humanity. And yet we took great pains to be the country that we are, not to resort to abuses. In some cases, they happened, as we know.
I can tell you a whole list of people. I grew up in the German Midwest in Wisconsin, people who changed their names during World War II. German Americans who changed their names, not Jewish, German American Lutherans, Catholics, because they didn't want to have a German-sounding name. And, of course, the internment of the Japanese. But leaving aside the legal issues, because the fact is that the government needs to have freedom to investigate. The idea that no one could go into a mosque and listen to what the preachers were saying was an absurd limitation on law enforcement. The idea that you could listen to one cell phone, but not the other cell phones that were registered to the same guy is absurd. And so obviously, and the notion that they can go after a deadbeat dad or a mob criminal with legal tools that were not available to them to go after terrorists was wrong. And the Patriot Act fixed all that and was an advance in all that. We all agree. But the question that's of concern to us as the God Squad and here in our work is, how do we enable people to avoid generalizing, as Tom says, from the Muslim terrorists that are arrested, who are really terrorists, and the Muslim living next door to you? How do we deal with that generalization prejudice, which is really, really, we all agree, a cancer in this country?
Well, I think it starts with the teachings of our own respective faiths. All of the Abrahamic faiths talk to us about embracing the stranger, about loving your neighbor, about standing up for the outcast, the stranger, the one who is persecuted, without regard to whether they are like you. In fact, certainly from my own Christian faith, especially if they are not. And as clergy and as religious people, we have an obligation to be visible in our support for Muslim people, our support, we need to work ourselves, be educated ourselves, to dispel illusions about Islam. I had a child come into one of my religious education classes asking me, why do they hate us? So I called the Islamic Center of Long Island. I said, rather than me trying to respond, I responded, of course, but I said, let's go find out what Muslims do believe, who they are. And I sent a group up there, and the only thing I told them is, you're not allowed to convert, your parents will kill me, at least not till you're adults. And I think those kinds of things are essential. I think Jewish and Christian and other clergymen have to be the first ones out there to stand up
You know,
for the rights of
interestingly,
Muslims.
when we started 18 years ago, that was one of the first things we did. We met at a TV station, went outside into a parking lot, had a 2.5-hour discussion, and then shortly thereafter I went to Mark's synagogue and we did our first show at the
Naeem,
synagogue.
talk to us about what you think is the way out of this subterranean cultural prejudice against Muslims.
I think dialogue is absolutely essential between Muslims and other communities, and it's essential to see Muslims as part of the American fabric, not as outsiders. I think one of the reasons that it's been possible for reactions to happen with Muslims is because there's a perception of them being outsiders, you know. And one of the things that you'll see missing in a lot of the conversation about Muslims is there's a huge portion of American Muslims who are black Muslims.
Yes.
They're never talked about, they're never shown in the media. The reason is, I believe, because they're American, they're not recent immigrants, and therefore it's harder to have prejudice against them of these people being strangers who came to our shores. And I've actually been a big advocate of, having black Muslims be part of the conversation, because one of the things that happens is when people see somebody like me who's a recent immigrant, it's easier for them to think, well, this person's an outsider anyway. That builds.
Yes, but there are problems with that dialogue because certain, like Elijah Muhammad's teachings and
well,
so on.
that's not.
You don't
that's
mean
not,
that.
No, I don't. Mean
You don't mean that.
No,
Let's make that clear. You don't mean Elijah Muhammad and the black Muslims. You mean real Muslims who are from Africa.
Let me ask the question in the opposite way. Can the Muslims look upon themselves as American first?
Well, they do. Muslims in America are American Muslims. I mean, that's how we refer to ourselves as well. It's a two-way street. There's the American Muslim community certainly needs to reach out more, and more of that is happening, and the outside communities need to reach out more.
Look, you're an American Catholic. It's an American Muslim. I'm an American Jew. As long as you put American first, I think, we're on the way to fixing it.
And that's why we're doing the show on the God Squad at Telecare. Thank you, Pastor Lukens and Naeem, for joining us. When we return, we'll be joined by our filmmaker friend who has documented the Muslim youth experiences. So stay with us. Welcome back. Joining us in the studio now is Theresa Thanjan, director of Whose Children Are These?, which won the Best Documentary at the 4th Annual Indian Diaspora Film Festival in New York. Welcome, Theresa.
Thank you very much.
Theresa.
Thank you for having
It's
me.
good to have you here. And you're Catholic, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing that you have...
They put both Catholics on
I
their
understand.
side.
I understand. And then they put the Jew and the Muslim who have
Are
really
trying to get into the
almost identical
tent.
beliefs. Almost identical beliefs. We have more greasy food than
But we own the
Muslims.
TV studio.
I understand.
And we're all at the same table.
How did you come from? You're a social worker, and you made this wonderful documentary. Could we take a look at part of it? You brought some for us to see.
Yes, I did. And the name of the documentary is Whose Children Are These?
And what is it about?
It focuses on the experience of 3 Muslim teenagers in America and talks about what it's like for them to be Muslim in a post 9/11 environment. They are the stories that don't get a lot of coverage in the media.
Right.
And, one is a popular athlete who was almost deported. Another story focuses on a young woman who's an honor student whose father was detained as a result of a program called Special Registration. And the third is a young, very outspoken Muslim activist.
Well, let's take a look now.
The whole prospect of America totally changed after my dad was detained. We just thought it was so easygoing and, innocent people aren't harmed. innocent people are not chased after. And my father went to special registration thinking he was complying with the law, you know, on his own volition. That didn't help, you know. One of the lawyer told me that your father is an honest man, and he stepped into his own grave. Life is difficult. My father was the breadwinner of the house, you know, so after my dad left, it was like the credit card bills, the phone bills, and the telephone bills. And I was like, oh my God, how do you do this? You know, this is not me. You know, I was always in my world, in school, and what to buy, and how to do really good in my studies, and, you know, be up there with all the top students. And after this situation, I became really strong in things, you know.
Push it, push it. Oh no, it doesn't work. You have to push it. You have to push it. It will.
After he left, I guess, I became more attached to them. They became more attached. Questions they'll ask my father, they usually ask me now, you know. And some of them are really hard questions, you know. Like, when is our father coming back? Everybody has their father. Why can't we have our father back? It's not fair, you know. And like one of them said, that you said God is always fair. How come God is not being fair now? I was just thinking, the world is so big and busy, and I'm just so small comparing to it, you know. And so I'm really tired. And I want my father back home.
That's an extraordinary story. Why was he deported back to Bangladesh? Was he suspected of being a terrorist?
No, actually, Mr. Ali, like the 83,000 men who registered under special registration, had absolutely no ties to terrorism. He had come here seeking political asylum, and upon showing up in good faith for the special registration program, he had found out that his lawyer failed to file the appropriate papers for his appeal.
Oh my God.
And he was then immediately detained.
Because he was an illegal.
And Muslim.
And Muslim. But
Not
he
a
was,
good combination.
Right, but he was also following the letter of the law, trying to go through the process. It was not his fault that his lawyer, who he had paid good money to, did not file the necessary papers for his case. And
What did the lawyer say?
The lawyer actually signed a written affidavit
That he messed up.
that he messed up, and Mr. Ali was deported anyway. And I think that Nabila represents hundreds of thousands of young people in this country where, you know, are there the collateral damage of 9/11. We don't really hear or see their stories, and how these children have a very strong American identity, very strong dedication and affiliation to this country.
Sure.
But are not considered at all in the debate or in the conversations when it comes to the war on terror.
What is special registration, just to clarify that? Because not everyone, you use that phrase, and I, for one, I knew about the Patriot Act. I never knew about special registration. What is it?
Special registration was a program put forth in 2002 by the Department of Justice. It was a program that required men and boys as young as 16 from 25 predominantly Arab and Muslim nations, only one non-Muslim nation, North Korea, to register with the United States government, meaning being fingerprinted, interrogated about their activities in the United States. It was all done in response, of course, to the 9/11 attacks.
But he wasn't in that range. He wasn't in that age range, was he? The
Yes,
father?
he was. Yes,
Oh.
As young as 16, but then up to
Up
yes.
to anything?
Yes.
Oh.
And essentially, what had happened was that, you know, when he was questioned, this program, the primary intent was to catch terrorists.
Sure.
It did not accomplish that goal. Not one person out of the 83,000 people that were actually, and I'm going to say this again, showed up in good faith to INS Federal Plaza thinking it would help their case for residency, because many were in the process of applying to be citizens, but because they were deported, they never got to finish the process. So when you think about that, you know, you think about people who are trying to comply with the laws, trying to do what they can to be here legally, and still met with this reaction. I mean, you think about the money that's
Sure.
being put in by the Department of Homeland Security to these types of measures, $76 million. And then you think about $6 million, a measly $6 million, to actually help to decrease the immigration backlog so that people can lawfully be here. To me, that's terrifying.
People who want to be in America and who are not suspected or implicated in any way at all. What do you believe is the way in the future now to balance the security of America and the rights of Muslims?
Well, first of all, I think we have to look critically. I mean, I think Naeem's project and, we have to really look at what are the effects of these programs and policies. And we have to look at the Patriot Act. I think you have a discussion, and sometimes when you think about the war on terror and, of course, protecting our nation's security, which are things that I believe in 100%, the other side of the debate isn't looked at. What is actually happening to these communities? How are people being impacted? 3 million American children have parents who are at least in some way trying to find status or are not here legally. What happens to these children? I mean, they are American citizens, but no one is considering them in this debate.
We must. Tom, what are your thoughts?
I look at the situation, and I remember when I went to Europe by myself, and I really was dependent upon the people there to be warm and friendly and kind. I can't imagine how hard it is to start it up again in a new country. And in the midst of that, I know that the country is trying to protect itself, and the people that we've heard from have a true story to listen to. In the dialogue will be the hope.
I think that we all hope that this war on terror is ended. And I think that offers the greatest hope for a normalization of our humanity. That during war, the difficult challenges of war put a stress on our best values. And I pray with all of you that the better angels of our nature, as Abraham Lincoln referred to them, will still emerge in this greatest country on earth.
I'm Father Tom Hartman.
And I am Rabbi Mark Gelman.
We're the God Squad. God bless you.